Thanks for being here. My name is Lila Anderson. I'm the Curator of Education for University Museums. I'm delighted to present two of my colleagues today for a talk about Christian Petersen and memorial art. Before I just do anything, most all of you saw it, but we do have the exhibition From Time Immemorial downstairs that focuses on memorial art, specifically Christian Petersen and some of his early works that you'll learn much more about today. But I do encourage you to see that during our opening hours. So, without further ado, I want to introduce to you Allison Sheridan, who has many titles here. She's our collection manager, the curator of the Farmhouse Museum, also works on our publications, and she knows a lot about Christian Petersen. I'm also delighted to introduce Sydney Marshall, who's the curator of both the exhibition downstairs. She's also the curator of this space here, the Christian Petersen Art Museum, and takes care of our public art collection and curates in the Anderson Sculpture Garden. They can tell you a little bit more about themselves, but that is their both multifaceted titles. So thanks for being here today.
I'll start. So yeah, I'm Sydney Marshall. Like Lila said, I am a curator here. That's basically my introduction. I work in this space outside in public art, and I've been learning about Christian Petersen for the last 2 years or so.
And I like to say Chris is the other Chris in my life, Christian Petersen. I've spent a lot of time with Christian Petersen, and I work on the collection, and then I've been involved with a lot of acquisitions over the last 20 years, as well as care and conservation of that collection, which Sydney has now taken over. And then I'm also working on the Christian Petersen Catalog Raisonné, which will be an online publication that will be accessible and free to all. It's a searchable database. And it's basically everything Christian Petersen ever made that we know of. And so currently it's a giant Excel document with about 1,500 lines on it for the different object entries. But we learn more every day. I just told Sydney this morning that we had one of the plaster versions of a sculpture arrive literally on Friday that we didn't know even existed. And it's of a bust of Pamela. And so we're constantly learning, we're constantly evolving, and having this online version of a catalog, we can actually keep it up to date, which is a great thing. All right, I think we're ready to start. I didn't think about holding all of this. Okay, I don't know what you just go for it. So a little bit about memorials. Typically memorials think, oh, somebody died, we do a memorial. Well, there's also war memorials, but there's also memorials to events and people's achievements, and we're going to go through and kind of cover, I'm going to cover Christian Petersen's early career, and then Sydney will break it down even further and cover his career at Iowa State. One of the things about Christian Petersen is he spent his early life on the East Coast. So we always think of him, as an Iowa State artist, but truly it was almost like a midlife crisis that brought him here. And he really started during the New Deal and the Public Works of Art program and project under Graham Wood. He had a few commissions earlier than that in Iowa, but his main stride was hit then, and then with the hiring on as the artist in residence at Iowa State University. So let's talk about his early career. There he is, the handsome fella. This is, I think, a 1924 picture of Christian Petersen. We don't have a lot of pictures of him. I tried to put in some context when we do have pictures, but he just wasn't photographed that frequently back in the day. So one of the earliest memorial works of art that he did, and I think you've probably not seen this because we found this picture I'm going to say 8 months ago. It was during the pandemic, and the Second Congregational Church of Attleboro, Massachusetts, responded to our guest curator, Leah DeLong, who's done a lot of scholarship on Christian Petersen, responded to an inquiry. We knew this existed. We had on a roll. It was listed as an eagle-type sculpture. Well, kind of. But the person in charge of the Second Congregational Church actually was able to provide us with pictures and a little bit of background. As you can see, it's installed on a wall. It's a pretty big sculpture. It's 38 inches tall. It is not an eagle. It is a winged woman. And you can see she's kind of holding the laurel wreath, a peace wreath. And then I tried to put a detail of the honor roll itself, which is those that were lost. You can see 1918, so it was lost in World War I. for Attleboro, Massachusetts. And so you can see the names there. You'll start to see he kind of develops his technique in lettering on bas-reliefs as we go along, but you'll start to see him evolve as an artist. This is pretty early in his career. He had taken some classes at the New York Technical School, the Art Students League, but he was a die cutter. And die cutting is very small work in medallions, metals, spoons, that kind of thing. So this was quite the departure for him. And it was, again, one of his earliest larger works of art. It's not in the round, so it's a mounted piece. It's supposed to be mounted on the wall. And it would have been cast by Gorham in in Providence, Rhode Island. So the Gorham Foundry, they actually had an art division. You may have heard of Gorham silverware or maybe even, they make bronze sculptures all the time. That was their art division. And Christian Petersen used them frequently throughout his life and went to them as the go-to art casting for bronze works of art. So the next slide is the Attleboro war chest. So we are still in Attleboro. The date is a little sketchy on this one. So this could predate the honor roll. It was, in all reality, probably utilized to drum up a kind of war relief, whether that was raising funds or raising supplies to send to the boys overseas. And again, you can kind of see that he's working on his text and developing that lettering. It's a very different style for Christian Petersen. It's not your typical rounded forms. That doesn't come about for a while into his career, and truly was influenced by Grant Wood. And so you can see it's a more raw look. It's almost more realistic than we're used to for Christian Petersen. It is inscribed, "Let your eagles bring relief," through Attleboro's war chest. A war chest was typically utilized to, again, drum up funds, whether that was to financially support the war effort or support with materials and supplies. There was actually a large theatrical prop that was created for Attleboro that was a treasure chest, but massive, from here to here, and people would put their donations into this treasure chest. And so, again, the timing of this one, probably a little bit earlier than the one we just looked at, but we don't know for sure. This is also another one you can see in the very corner here. It's a little tough, but this is where we start seeing his signature more clearly develop, and you'll see that evolve over the different sculptures.
How big is that?
I think we had it listed at, we don't know, because the location's unknown. So this is the only photograph to exist. We actually don't know where it is. And Attleboro has been contacted. They don't know where it is. It could have been that it was a plaster and got broken. If it was cast in bronze, it could have been melted. This is the fate of the next one for World War II in those efforts. And so, unknown. I would estimate with that amount of detail, it's probably what they call a tablet size. So you're talking, maybe 2 feet by a foot, something like that. But a lot of effort and work going into this. I don't think it was just a casual, I'm going to make something for the war chest to advertise it. It's a lot more effort and a story being evolved. So this is another one that could have been referred to as the eagle sculpture, because you note the eagle at the very top. And again, symbol of the United States. So it is unclear in the Christian Petersen records what they were intending to mean by eagle sculpture. Was it the winged woman, winged liberty, or is it this kind of sculpture? But then we also had lists of the Attleboro war chest. And this photograph appears in his archives here at Iowa State. And again, no real reference to it, but we know obviously he signed it, so he created this work of art. The next one. So shifting gears a little bit, a memorial to people. This is called the Nurses Memorial, and it's a memorial to Ruth Holden and Alice Illingsworth Haskell. Both, again, in the Attleboro area, where Christian Petersen was living. He kind of bounced around between Providence and Attleboro during this time. And this is actually still around. Or no, excuse me, this is the one I was telling you about that was melted during World War II. But it was initially installed in the sturdy Memorial Hospital there. A tribute to these two nurses who went above and beyond in the call of duty, again, right after the war, so I'm assuming that they saw both 1918 pandemic and war suffrage and helped during that time. Again, a very different style, but if you look at Christian Petersen's medallion designs, it much more clearly smacks of this type of art than it does of anything that you would typically recognize of his later works. So he did this winged figure once again. You can see details of torches, books, a lot of laurel wreaths, and then he has that text at the bottom, and it's typed up there what it says for the inscription. Next. This one is still around. This is a painted plaster, and it is another nurse's memorial. This is the Janie Flynn Memorial. It is in a hospital in Massachusetts, and again, a memorial to her efforts during a pandemic. Well, we can all know what those efforts could be. And so this is a little bit later, the 1918 pandemic is what it's referencing. Again, a travesty. And so near the end of World War I, that influenza epidemic broke out, and it's estimated to have killed around 20 million people worldwide. Attleboro alone lost around 200 citizens from the flu. Now, this is a different city than Attleboro, but again, this was deeply affecting Christian Petersen, his life and his circles. And so to memorialize this was probably very moving for him, because he wasn't seeing the war on the war front, he was seeing the results of the war being back home. But he was definitely feeling the effects of what the pandemic was doing and ravaging through the United States. This is a little bit different. So this is a memorial to a superintendent in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. His name was Frank Orman Draper. He is related to a Draper circle of family that Christian Petersen was friends with. And so that may have been the impetus for this memorial being a Christian Petersen derived memorial. But again, the lettering is developing, it's getting finer. He's doing more portraiture at this point and moving along. It was a commissioned piece, again, by the teachers and the school children, and so they really wanted to remember this impactful superintendent of schools. It was done just 1 year after that person passed away. And it is still around. It's installed in that school system still, which is lovely to hear. The Spanish-American War Memorial. This is truly a transitional piece for Christian Petersen. Some of you have seen the Panthers, the two Panthers that he did. Not memorials. Doesn't really fit with this talk. But in context, we don't really know when the Panthers were created, probably around 1920. That was his first big sculptures in the round, sculptures that you could literally walk around. And then this came about. And this is a commission, and it's a commission from the Newport, Rhode Island, the city. And Christian Petersen spent quite a lot of time kind of scouting out parks and locations so that he had the perfect park. I will say it is not the perfect park anymore. Having visited this in person, it has the park has lost its luster, so I'm glad Christian Petersen's not around anymore. But truly it was at the hub of the community. And so Petersen really wanted to make sure the environment was right for his first major sculpture. And so he was probably hired to do this through a company that was commissioned. He worked quite a bit with Tilden Thurber, based in Providence, Rhode Island. Likely Tilden Thurber was contacted by the city, and they said, oh, we have an artist in mind, Christian Petersen. And so it probably didn't come from somebody, oh, I saw Christian Petersen and he's fabulous. He wasn't that well known at that point. So this was his first, aside from the Panthers, again, we don't know the date on them, this was his first kind of big sculpture in the round. If you want to switch to the next slide. So you can see a few more details. I said, the park has seen better days. Her sword has gone awry, so she no longer has her sword. And it's really interesting because as a sculptor, the Spanish-American War, he wasn't really telling the story of the Spanish-American War. Like, nothing here says anything about Spanish-American War, but it has that same draped, torched lady, and there's actually laurel leaves around. The one thing I will note that you can't see in these pictures is under her foot is the head of Medusa. And again, we didn't know that until we actually saw in person, or our curator, Leah, saw in person. And so that tells a little bit of a story, but again, not the Spanish-American War story. And so if you're a history buff, you probably know what I'm talking about, but the only thing that really smacks of the Spanish-American War is on the back side, that kind of cross plaque has text that speaks to those lost and the dedication of those lost. So you can see from the very, very beginning, that is the installation of the sculpture. She hasn't changed a whole lot since her day, but he chose the stone, he chose every aspect of that. Absolutely.
Is her left hand different?
I think it's just the angle.
It looks like it's.
Yeah, I think it's just the angle. I mean, she still has her little torch, and the only thing that is missing is definitely the sword. And again, yeah, I think it's just the angle. One's a little bit lower than the other. So if you're in that area, go visit.
So she's holding a torch in that left.
Yes. Yep. It's hard to see. I know. Next, switching gears completely again. So New Bedford, Massachusetts, home to one of my favorite museums, the New Bedford Whaling Museum. This actually resides in the New Bedford Whaling Museum. It's called the Seaberry Memorial. The memorial is not to one single person, but to a seafaring family, and they were called the Seaberries. And so they actually operated whaling ships. So it was commissioned by one of the family members and then donated to the museum. And so you can see several of the families there, William being the patriarch of the family, and then his sons that followed in his footsteps. You can see a race of seafaring men. And then it was dedicated in 1924, and then Annie Seaberry Wood was a member of that family. What's really interesting is that museum has holdings that include family portraits of all of these people. And so you can see, I put the one that's William Seaberry there. They also have all of many of the ship's records. And so the logs of the ship, the captain's records, what they were hauling, where they were going, the day-to-day, what the weather was like. So it truly helps paint the picture. Again, they have a kind of a complete presentation. And I put the picture up in the corner there. It's super blurry, that's why I put the black and white up, so that you can see the text. But it is a painted plaster. So this is one of the first that we've identified as a true painted plaster of his. And he paints his plasters, and he still did it all the way through his career, to mimic bronze and the look of bronze. Bronze was not affordable to him at the time. This actually ended up being cast in bronze. And so somewhere the painted plaster has gone by the wayside, because that's what he would have created, and this is actually the bronze. So you're seeing a picture of the plaster in black and white, and then a picture of the bronze that was the resulting. So he technically created two works of art in that case, but he probably would have had it cast in Gorham or somewhere similar, an art foundry. He never really cast his own bronze works of art. So resulting from this memorial, he probably got the commission that was his next big sculpture, and that is for New Bedford, Massachusetts again, but it was a more centrally located sculpture. This is called the Battery D Memorial, and it honored an artillery shell company. Again, 1924, so World War I. And you can see they've got a wreath-laying ceremony and dedication here. And then in the next slides, you can see we actually have an early picture of Christian Petersen sculpting it. And he started in the very traditional fashion of kind of sculpting the figure that would then be cloaked in the clothes. And so this is Petersen working in what was then his studio. You'll see this picture used a lot because it's one of the few early pictures we have. And then we have an Armistice Day celebration, and then it was also had some early coverage in a newspaper. And so you can see the picture. I know it's faint, but in 1924 it was in a newspaper. I think it was the Boston Traveler. So with this work of art, you're seeing him more truly represent the struggle that was going on and the war that he was representing, as opposed to the Spanish-American War Memorial, which was kind of a straight-up cloaked woman, winged torch figure. This is definitely more truer to the events that he was trying to memorialize.
Would he have actually done his work with a tie-on? Or was that posed?
I've seen many pictures of him in his studio with his tie on. And he had a white apron that he would wear over it, and he'd just tuck his little tie in there. So he could have been the guy that never took off his tie, I don't know. But I've seen many, even later on in life. There was a big docu-series or photo documentation of his studio in the 50s, and he's always got a tie on in every one of those pictures. So he was made to be a professor later on. Next slide is what it looks like, 2015, or what these pictures. So it's still in really good shape. The houses have popped up all over around it, so it's kind of encroached a little bit, but they still tend to it and make sure that it's well cared for. It's seen some corrosion due to the elements and things like that, so it's very green, but again, it's still in good shape and has all of its parts. Next slide. So this one's a little bit different. I'm assuming everyone's heard of the Titanic. Kate Winslet, Leonardo DiCaprio. Based on actual events, Christian Petersen chose to commemorate Arthur Henry Rostrom, who was the Carpathia ship captain. They actually rescued numerous people from the Titanic sinking. It's a story that's not often told, and certainly not in Hollywood. And so why? Why would Christian Petersen choose to do this? And it's such a strange, kind of raggedy work of art. We've got it in our collection. It's plaster. It doesn't have finish to it, a finish that you would have expected. So my guesstimation is that he was working for a die cutting firm called Robbins in Ttleboro, Mass. And they probably said, oh, we're going to commemorate the Carpathia and this captain. We're looking for proposals. And he was not selected. So I'm betting this was a proposal because John Flanagan, a very famous die cutter, was selected. And then literally 6 months later, out comes the round medallion from John Flanagan, same firm, honoring this captain. Completely different look, but again, a round medallion size piece. And so I'm guessing that it was kind of an internal competition for design. There may have been a client, a specific client, that said, we prefer this design over the other. Maybe there wasn't enough information or detail here. But again, this is wonderful that it's existed. And it existed in George Nerney. You can see where the location is. George Nerney was the original owner, and George Nerney was best friends with Christian Petersen, and lifelong friends. Next. So I told you he works in medallions. He also has some commemorative works in this batch. There are some medals that you'll see a little bit later on from Sydney. But this is the Warren Harding Memorial, so it was after Harding died. It's a memorial medallion, 1926. You can see Harding on the front face, and then on the back is the Harding Memorial facade. Two different, struck in silver and struck in bronze. There's actually gifts by moi. I found it on eBay. And then it's also in the Yale University. If you don't know, they have a great mystics collection, and so it's also in that collection. He also did other presidents, and Cindy will talk a little bit more on that later on. Next. And isn't she a doll? Pretty. So, as opposed to presidents and a bunch of deceased white men, this is a little bit interesting. This is to commemorate and memorialize a visit of the Queen of Romania at the time in 1926. And it's a really, this picture justice, but it's a really gorgeous, detailed portrait plaque of her. So this is tiny. It's like 3 by 2. It looks huge here. It looks like one of those big tablets, but it is not. It's tiny. And again, it was just to commemorate her visit to this hotel in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1926. And several were struck. We don't know why. We don't know if she had some big following or if there was some sort of commemorative gift given to people at this time. But it was struck by, I believe, Whitehead and Hogue in Newark, New Jersey, the company that kind of Christian Petersen switched over to after he left Robin's company. Next. This was a fun find. So we knew it existed. And, I mean, what else does one do during a pandemic but Google? So it's a 1929 plaque. What makes it interesting is it kind of commemorates an explorer. And we knew the title of the plaque, we knew the date. That was about it. And so upon Googling, found out it's still alive and living well. And it's actually in Cedar City, Utah, in a kind of a, granite boulder it's mounted in. And so you can see, it's hard to see the details in it, but it is the explorers at the top, and there's actually a topographic map that the rest of it is made out of. It's made to kind of look like a ledge, but then the map is kind of ingrained in there. The best place to see that is in the corner here where you see Santa Fe, very tiny. Yep, there you go, see it's Santa Fe. And so, and then the text that we're getting used to seeing of Christian Petersen. In all likelihood, this was a commission piece. There are rumors that Christian Petersen donated his services for this. I don't know why he would do that. It's not like he was flush with money. This is probably the furthest west his pieces are installed. There's a couple that go out to California eventually, but that's not during his lifetime. And so, kind of an interesting find. The next slide shows an article during the dedication, and Christian Petersen did not go out for the dedication, but you can see that it made the Salt Lake Tribune in 1930 when it was dedicated, with these two fine gentlemen who were probably mayor, society people, and club members. But really interesting and very different for Christian Petersen. Next sculpture, back to war memorials. A very different figure, but notice the appearance of the torch again. So this was actually a proposal for the American Legion in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Some of you are familiar with Fort Dodge. See some nods. So Christian Petersen presented this proposal in 1932. He actually sculpted the proposal to be cast in bronze. And it was to commemorate, again, those whose lives were lost. The inscription, "To you from falling hands, we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high." It's a very moving piece. Unfortunately, see the location? Presumed destroyed. So it was probably never cast in bronze. In all likelihood, he maybe repurposed the clay or, whatever he was utilizing, or it just went away and disappeared. So location unknown. We wish we knew where it was. But Cindy will talk about the relationship between this design and a little bit later design. And last slide for me, Old Abe. Again, Cindy will touch on this a little bit, but this was done for a competition because we love Abraham Lincoln in the United States. And so Milwaukee, Wisconsin had a competition for a sculpture. This actually was a runner-up for that competition to be scaled up on a larger scale. We have articles that include Christian Petersen's name as the runner-up, and so there's lots of information to follow this. It was misnoted in a few places that it was for Chicago, but it was actually for Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So one of these, Petersen kept this, and then Charlotte Petersen, his wife, donated to the Gilbert School District. They allowed us to purchase it from them with the caveat that we would have it cast in bronze and a bronze cast put there because this is painted plaster. And so the bronze cast lives up there. It's a little more durable for Gilbert School, No more peanut butter and jelly hands. And then we have the plaster cast as well as bronze cast, and you can see the bronze cast out in the sculpture garden. Any questions on his early career before I turn it over to Sydney?
You say there's one image of him at the Gilbert School. Is that-
Yeah, so it's the bronze. There's a bronze of that. We didn't want to just completely, because they got used to it, of course, being many years there. But they agreed that the housing of the more fragile work of art in our collection was probably a better choice than he was installed in kind of a makeshift trophy cabinet. So it wasn't very, very nice place. And now they can put him out and not have to really worry about grubby hands or,
Well, plaster is scary even here.
Yes, oh yeah, we're very, very careful. Any other questions? Okay, Sydney, I'm going to do this.
I'll show you. You can't hear me. Okay, good. Okay. All right. So, my half is basically going to be focused on when Christian Petersen does move to Iowa. So, she was just saying that that was for Gilbert School. So eventually, Christian Petersen does come to Iowa as part of the Public Works of Art project. But before that, he is working in Des Moines, in Illinois, in the Midwest, doing a lot of different, mostly portrait busts of like wealthy people in Des Moines, community members, other presidents, working with Edgar Harlan in the Historical Society in Des Moines, and basically, trying to get work during the Depression. And so, in a lot of this, as we're like looking through what was chosen to be created by Christian Petersen when he's working here at Iowa State, I think it's interesting to think of the concept of like him being on a campus, being an artist in residence, but also partially being tied to representing the university and creating things for that artist in residence over many years, and having them kind of direct a little bit what he's going to be creating and earning money from. So similar to in his early career, he would be tied to what he could be commissioned to, but there are definitely things, examples of things that he's hoping to get commissioned that we'll talk about as well. So basically this first little section will talk about some of the individuals he's trying to commemorate. Some of these are true memorials in that they were after their death, but a lot of these are kind of commemorating significant people for the university. So the first, Allison gave me this wonderful picture of Pamela. It makes me laugh every time because he does really look like his portrait, so that makes me happy. But this is Louis Pamela, and this is the first commission that Christian Petersen got for the Iowa State College. This is when he was working basically in Des Moines doing a lot of these portrait busts. And basically the reaction from the faculty was like, wow, it looks so much like Louis Pamela. I'm really impressed, and you should come do more things for us. And I mean, fair enough, it does kind of look like him. So really after that point, Raymond Hughes was the then president. He basically said that they would like to work more with Christian Petersen. This was also the time when the Public Works of Art project was happening. And so Grant Wood hired Christian Petersen to come to Iowa State and work on the many public works of art, mostly the dairy industries mural that we have, but also to come here and work. And then Raymond Hughes kind of continued on this relationship with Christian Petersen for many years. And so these portrait busts are kind of a typical thing for him to be working on throughout his career. In the same way that we continue to make portraits of people who are significant to the university as a way to kind of build that lasting history. So that's something that, of course, for the person when they're alive, that's a great honor for leaving your position, but it definitely does build like a long-lasting memory of the history of the school and the contributions of these people. So another example, I have one more example, is Charles Friley, president of Iowa State College. It's pretty typical even now to, if not doing a portrait bust, we definitely still do portraits painted. In this exhibition, we have one of a department chair. But we were talking, Allison and I, before this, they were really painted more frequently. But in 1937, they already had Christian Petersen on campus, who's a great sculptor, who's really known for doing these portrait busts. It's probably kind of a way to take advantage of the resident artist. You might as well kind of switch over to portrait busts. I think that's kind of what happened throughout his time at Iowa State. And then, yeah, I did mention Abraham Lincoln. He did many examples of Abraham Lincoln throughout his life. A lot of these here are like before he was in Iowa. This was given to a president of Iowa State, and then this one here is in downstairs in Morrill Hall. But again, you know, like Allison mentioned, kind of thinking of the context of why would Christian Petersen create all of these. Sure, maybe he really loved maybe his very unique face, but also everyone loves Abraham Lincoln as a president to like memorialize and hopefully then commission, right? So I think it's kind of thinking of something that you could create and submit as a proposal, similar to the one that Allison presented, or you know, being at Iowa State later on, we have a connection to him and having signed the Morrill Act, so I think it's kind of, you know, maybe there was a reason for him to kind of continue to try to depict Lincoln. And then as far as, you know, other methods of him creating memorials during this time, he also was going back to his roots doing die cutting, and different than a traditional memorial as far as someone dying, this is something that's memorializing research and people's work, so these would be given to individuals who, well, this is the Eli Lilly Research Award, so for doing great research, or also in this one having, you know, done great achievements in engineering. So this one I think is a more typical memorial in that the award is named after Anson Marson from Iowa State, so that in some ways another way that universities kind of honor and commemorate people who had a significant impact. So we saw Morrill Hall, this award. So he is depicted here, and then on the back side, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a bridge here, and you know, a dam, and there's other examples basically of public engineering. So he has a little bit of both of honoring the specific individual, but also honoring the work of people who would be receiving the award too. And then Allison was telling me, she's got all the facts, so I'm going to tell you all the secret Allison facts. But so these are a drawing for the, this is the back of this one, because I mean the figure is removed, but there's definitely still the bridge and the dam would be here. But these two are very different in design. They're, you know, working in a draft table. So it's possible that there's a separate design that we don't have in the collection that we don't know about, but it's kind of a stretch to go from here to here. But these are really detailed drawings, so he definitely went really far down that path of not fully creating a new design. Let me see. Oh yeah, and so we have another kind of more traditional memorial. This is commissioned by this man's family, Ernest Lindstrom. And so he had died, and he was a really great scholar in genetics. So they, you know, commissioned this work, and like Allison said, we have that lettering that's really typical of Christian Petersen, and he's, you know, working in the bas-relief style. So it's another one that he's kind of doing throughout this time period of basically memorializing people's achievements in their field too, not just from having died, you know, for nothing. They're also choosing to memorialize their work. And then one that's pretty famous here on campus, at least, is the George Washington Carver Memorial. So George Washington Carver, Christian Petersen chose to create a proposal. So similar to some of his other plaster works, he created this in a smaller, it's like 1/3 scale carving, and it was actually not realized in his lifetime, but in 1968, I think, the class, you know, the alumni class purchased the plaster, and then in 1999 it was cast in bronze and placed out in the courtyard. So it's something where you can kind of see this is a drawing of him working with the idea that it would just be a bust, but then you have the hand coming up, so it's kind of an evolution of his design into still showing his work, showing the person, and then deciding to do a full-scale body. And then this was also made larger and placed in front of seed signs as well. And in terms of it being on campus, I think it's another kind of interesting idea of, you know, who we're choosing to memorialize. You know, George Washington Carver is, of course, a very influential person, both here and across the country. but we have the square, the building named after Carver and these works of art, so I think it definitely helps to build public memory in the university as well, to honor the people who really made a big influence on our public culture, basically. And this, yeah, go ahead.
Back to that last picture. It's interesting, in 49, you see two black faces in that picture.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That would not have been probably the right percentage of
For Iowa State, right, yeah. Yeah, and I'm not sure at the time, with his classes or with Iowa State as a whole, what the demographics would be, but right.
And that picture's in his studio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can see the other works of art surrounding it.
Yeah, you have his fallen shoulder and yes, and some of his are back there. And then this one we have is, again, a traditional, more tragic memorial where this young child had died, and it was commissioned as part of for the schools, basically, to kind of honor this boy's death. This was in this building for many years, and it was taken out. It's in our collection. And again, has the lettering and kind of just saying in memory of the specific person, and basically a very traditional memorial, I would say, for him. Okay, and so then another thing later on in Christian Petersen's career here, he was here teaching during World War II. Many students obviously left to go fight. He remained behind to teach and to have, he interacted with many of the people who were remaining or came back. And during this time, he made many different proposals, particularly in drawings, but then he would create proposals for war memorials for the campus. This is one, Men of Two Wars, that is in the Memorial Union now. And it definitely has a similar idea to this original design that Allison showed you. We have somebody who is still kind of not fully passing the torch is not there anymore, but in the same way you have someone who is now in World War II soldier, going forward past the original design of someone from World War I. And it's interesting to me that this first one was made in 1933 when it's like, he didn't know the effect of the many years past this, what would kind of happen and how it would affect the campus, and then he was really there working with a lot of people who were young and leaving for the war. So I think a lot of his war memorials are much more realistic and kind of showing the sacrifice of students and people who are staying behind, where some of his earlier memorials kind of have a tone of glory and glorifying war and what you're fighting for, where in a lot of these it's much more realistic of the pain of the people who are actually going into war. So, like I said, he does have many different smaller, either plaster or smaller carved proposals. They may not have been made into large-scale memorials, but he was definitely still kind of proposing them. I also wonder, he's still, throughout this whole time, he's making portrait busts, doing the typical commissions for the university. And I kind of wonder if he, is making these just out of interest in some ways too, if not to fully get it built. And so this one was definitely, though, something for a competition for an unknown soldier monument, which was not built, but it's something that he proposed. He played with this idea in many of the drawings that we have in our collection too.
Which Museum of Modern Art?
In New York, right?
New York.
Yeah, in New York. Yeah. And then we have the Fallen Soldier, which we do have in our collection. And again, it's kind of another example of something that's definitely not glorifying war. It's showing someone in the act of dying, basically. And that is something where, you're still not memorializing a specific person or one specific person who died, but this was placed in the Memorial Union and then was later removed. It was put back. And then this is one of the stories where I think it's interesting how memorials kind of build on the story over time, because at this point, there was just the one World War II that he was trying to memorialize, but as it's out and we continue to show it, there's been many wars since then that you can still have it be a memorial to soldiers. So I think that's kind of an interesting idea. Memorials kind of gathering strength and stories as they go. And another one where, similar to the medallions for research and knowledge, this is something where he's still continuing to, even for the American Legion, many of these were created before he came to Iowa State, but they would be reduced over time. So this is again something where these smaller medallions are given out to individuals for to memorialize their contributions. And again, I think it's an idea of how these things are passed down to different families over time, and how then that object kind of becomes a smaller memorial that's maybe not in public, but now is in our collection. So now it can be kind of a public memorial to those wars. And then this is kind of an interesting, again, he was making these smaller sculpture proposals, but he also was thinking about public, like installations of art, along with, the other, found in the Four Seasons, obviously, and many other public works of art that he has very site-specific ideas for. This is a memorial idea here. It's hard to see the detail. He may not have gone into too much detail with it, but for in front of the armory to have another war memorial there. And then another thing that Christian Petersen is doing outside of just memorializing war and soldiers experiencing the war is he definitely is talking about people who were left behind or were affected by war on the home front or in Europe too. So this is one where Old Roman in prayer is also called the Refugee. And it's something where there's definitely religious tones to it, but it's also in his writings talked about that it is for people who are refugees of war, basically. So in 1940, this is in the library. Right now it has a little topper on it, so you can't go see it, but it's okay, it's safe now. So it's good, but it's still out, and is, again, just kind of memorializing more of an idea rather than like a specific event. And then this is another proposal for, this is for the Ames Cemetery for basically a memorial for a very broad, it was like the victims of all war is something that was written. It's just very wide sweeping. And this was just a base. I believe in some writings it says that there was a smaller model created, but we don't know where that went. So we have a smaller model here. And it's really pretty, it's downstairs, it's pretty small. Very rough, and I think it's kind of interesting to see him using that clay to really get a rough idea of his goals there. And then, again, this is an example basically of him depicting things that would be on the home front, most likely in England here, because of the Blitz and the bombings, basically. So he has a drawing that he's working from. This eventually was bought and placed in Marshalltown, Iowa. It's still there, you can go see it. But it's a woman kind of, clutching her baby away from whatever's going on in the background, basically. So, again, something that's showing the idea of war and the effects of war without really showing shoulders or the front. And another, okay, it's really hard to see in the pictures, but there's something where he has this idea of war memorials that say, let the voice of silence speak for those who made the sacrifice for God and country. And in these, he has different drawings featuring children or women who, again, would be left at home when the soldiers went to war. And he has many different ideas of this kind of memorial with a woman with a sword or a helmet and kind of looking mournfully down at like what was lost, basically. And then another thing that I think is kind of something that he's doing and thinking really kind of broadly with memorial art is thinking how, even though it may not be stated for a specific event or specific achievement, if you think really kind of broadly, a lot of things as we move forward build that kind of commemoration towards something and help build that public memory. And to me, it just is more of memorializing like the values of a certain time or the values of a campus. And a lot of Christian Petersen's work, I think, fits into that, and a lot of the work that we have in general in the Art on Campus collection, I think, fits in that as well. So I'm going to throw it back all the way to this first thing for the Public Works of Art project, the dairy panels and the food science building. So this is something that's, it was not intended to be a memorial to any specific person or really event, but it is showing a record of the history of dairying and is, to me now, kind of memorializing that past time frame and the methods of the past, basically. And I think it's kind of interesting to think of that as we move forward with our previous commissions that we have on campus. What do we take from that information that we're seeing, what was important to depict in commissions of public art, and what's, looking back, they have kind of idealized versions of even not that long ago for Christian Petersen when he's kind of choosing what to memorialize in his work. And again, another example, I think, of the Madonna of the Prairie, you can kind of memorialize contributions of motherhood, and the idea of the pioneer woman was something that he was thinking about in that, and moving forward, and the idea of progress, I think, is kind of a common one in some public art too. And then another for St. Cecilia with the children. This is for a school, St. Cecilia. Yeah, okay, I think that's right, St. Cecilia. It makes sense, right? That they would be St. Cecilia. And again, it's kind of showing this idea of the act of teaching, memorializing the idea of what the school was, its values and what it was trying to accomplish through this public art too. And this is, I think, my last one. So dedication to the future. It's Christian Petersen's last work of art, and something where he basically had true freedom over the design of this. He really was able to do whatever, and it was cast in bronze, which, he had a lot of things cast in bronze, but it was still a really big deal because this is a very large sculpture. It was right at the end of his life. He is showing basically, he wanted to show that the generation before is kind of holding up the next generation to see the light and kind of do better than the past generation. And it's still placed in this central fountain area. And it's, again, I think, an example of something where you're kind of commemorating the past without super making it an obvious reference to any specific past. It's just kind of the past in general, hoping that the future will be, brighter and better.